Good evening. How's
Good
everybody?
evening. Good. How are you?
I'm excited to be here. As always, this is the high. I tell you, this is the highlight of my week. I can hardly sleep on Tuesday nights, knowing I'm gonna get to spend Wednesday night with y'all. Uh, what was it? A friend of mine, he's retiring. He said, "Yeah, he got where he sleeps like a baby. He wakes up crying about every 2 hours and needs wet and crying. That's about like me." Oh, Dr. Sane, are you ready? This is Dr. Sane. Dr. Sane is with us tonight. He is an expert in intervention, MTSS, exceptional children, distinguished principal, central office. He is truly a Renaissance man, and we are so glad to have him with us this semester. And so, Dr. Sane, what have you got for us tonight?
Well, first of all, thank you. You. That's none of that is true, but I'll pretend that it's true. And I want to apologize for not being here last week, where I couldn't formally meet you all. But happy to be here. I Just a little bit about me quickly. I taught in Lincoln County and then was a principal or in with Kannapolis City Schools, and then went back to Lincoln County to do some work at the central office level. And then in October of this year, actually went to work for Curriculum Associates and am a consultant for their MTSS implementation for districts across the country. And so I apologize because I'm in an airport right now getting ready to go to California to work out there. But tonight, I think we're going to talk a little bit about human resources, right, Dr. Lamb?
We are.
All right. You want me to go ahead and dive in, or you got
Dive in, go, and then I'll catch you up on last week and all the wonderful. I've got a list of all the people I want to shout out tonight. What wonderful work they did. I'm
Okay.
gonna shout out Dion and Paul and Yolanda and Kathleen. I'm gonna shout them out later. So, and I saw some other good stuff too. There's really good stuff came in this week. So just jump right in.
Okay. All right. Well, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about human resources and how, when you all become wonderful principals, it's going to be a bit of a task to make sure that you manage the HR systems in your building effectively. And just kind of a disclaimer, and Dr. Lamb, I'm sure will agree, is that post-COVID, HR has changed pretty drastically.
1000%.
But here's the thing that I want you to take away from tonight. How we have to manage HR has changed just because there's a lack of people out there, but the things that we must do have not changed. We still have to follow procedures and protocols and make sure that we are doing exactly what we're expected. And that looks a little bit different in each district, but still at the end of the day, the framework is the same, the nuts and bolts are the same, and there are specific things that you can do to make sure that you keep your job in terms of managing HR. So let's dive right in. And I'm going to kind of break this evening into kind of four key elements or four key parts. And we're first going to talk about recruitment. And that is a huge piece to this job, especially in an environment since 2020. We're talk about hiring. We're going to talk about what happens after you hire with development and support. And then we're going to finish it off with the most interesting thing that you'll do in your job as an administrator, and that's evaluations. And I'm sure that you all love being evaluated by your administrators right now as educators. So again, we'll just end the evening with my part on that wonderful topic. And feel free to break in, ask questions. I will, full disclosure, I am awful at checking the chat. So I would appreciate it if you just come off mute and ask questions as we go through this. But again, if you put your question in the chat, I'll answer it at the end, or Dr. Lamb will probably ask it in the middle. So let's dive right into recruitment. So as a future principal, you've always got to be in recruiter mode, even when you don't have vacancies. That is imperative. And I'll tell you, that's one of the things that I struggled with as a principal, because there's so many things on your plate. But for those principals who are always in recruiter modes, they're never surprised when there's a vacancy. And in today's world of school, there's a lot of vacancies, and so you've always got to be in that recruiter mode. And what does that mean? You can see those bullets there. There's a whole list, but here are the highlights. You got to make your school as visible as possible. Social media has really changed the way schools advertise. So you got to be on top of that, advertising the events and the successes of your school. You got to bring in community members, local organizations as much as possible. The reason that being is you've got to get, again, those local organizations and communities will go out and spread the word. Somebody is unmuted. Okay. Um, I lost my train of thought there. I apologize. Oh, okay. There you go. Take every opportunity for you to be visible within the greater school community. It is so important that you are present, you are at events, because again, you are the number one advertiser for your school. You're the number one recruiter, and you've got to be out and be present, even on the days that you don't want to be. Make your school store. This is one of the things that again I wasn't as good at, but other principals in Kannapolis and Lincoln were, where they made their school store public. People were wearing their school branded items, and you do that a lot in middle school and high school. But I mean that's a wonderful opportunity for you to get your name out there in elementary school. Take it on the road, take it everywhere, take it to recruitment fairs. Again, get your school name out there. Attend as many job fairs as possible. We went through a trend there where, before COVID, where not a lot of people were attending job fairs. In some districts across the state, there are districts who regularly attend, but again, even attend job fairs when you don't have vacancies. Again, up there at the top, even when you don't have vacancies, be prepared, because something can always happen. Familiarize yourself with colleges and universities and establish strong relationships. Those are pretty common. But again, recruit student teachers, get student teachers in your buildings. I know some principals, some teachers don't want student teachers, or there might be a little bit of fear with student teachers, but in today's world, that's the best way you can train people for your building, for your culture, for your climate, and then put them in your classrooms. All right, so what are our ideal candidates? And there's a lot of legislation in states across this country. I'm supporting some that are starting to reduce who are our ideal candidates. What are the qualifications for candidates? So that's currently a pretty hot topic in education, and simply it's because we have so many vacancies. But who are our ideal candidates? And I've kind of modified this a little bit just to kind of match the times. But the best candidates make student teachers that you have in your building, or you have in neighboring that there may be in neighboring school districts that have a similar curriculum philosophy, or use the same type of curriculum adoptions, same demographics, etc., scope and sequences and curriculum, etc., because that means that they've been trained with the way you do things. So when you're looking for candidates, student teachers would be the first place that I would go. And again, they don't necessarily have to be in your building, but in districts that are similar to yours. The second one there, candidates with experience. In today's world, that's a lot, and you want people in your building who know what they're doing. With the role of a principal, you all probably see your administrators being pulled in every direction, and sometimes what that means is teacher support is on the backside of some of those initiatives. For example, school safety or just student behavior. So again, if you can hire candidates with experience that might not need as much support, candidates who value student relationships. I put that one in there because I always love this. My mentor told me this: curriculum can be learned, being able to bond with kids cannot. And so if you've got a teacher candidate who you're sitting in an interview and you can see and you know that they can bond with children, but they might not be the strongest in terms of knowing what standards they're teaching, hire that person. Because those are the people that are going to have good classroom management. They're going to be able to connect with kids. And like I said, you can learn curriculum. You've got people in your buildings to support that. Here's a big one for post-COVID reality: candidates with multiple licensures, math, science, EL, EC, etc. So experience teaching multiple grade levels or multiple spans. Just because in today's world you're having to move teachers to places where they might not necessarily want to go because there are vacancies. And that leads us to number 5, you've got to hire people who are willing to be flexible and to cover classes. It's just our realities, and even the districts, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lamb, but even the districts that had really low turnover rates and didn't really experience vacancies are struggling with vacancies.
Everybody is now.
Everybody is.
I get calls or emails 3 to 5 days a week. Do you know anybody? Have you heard of anybody? Can you find? Do you have bodies? Yes. I mean, places that never had problems before are experiencing it now. You're exactly right.
And I bet if we did a show of hands on how many people have covered another classroom in the last 2 weeks, I bet everybody would probably raise their hands. So yeah, that's just the world we're in. So you don't want somebody in your building who is not going to be willing to do that. But let me say this before I'll go ahead and go on to the next one, which kind of coincides with always anticipate vacancies. I just, one of the things that I don't want us to lose in this new reality of teacher vacancies is just hiring warm bodies, because there are detrimental consequences to that. And so there is always typically someone out there that we can find, and there are solutions to kind of support us finding good teachers until we can find good candidates. I don't want us to hire people. I had principals who came to me and said, Josh, there's just no one out there interviewing, so we're going to hire this person who has 0 teaching experience or has horrible reviews from another district. And I would always say, don't do that. There are other, let's try to come up with a plan to find an ideal candidate, because again, it's detrimental to our kids, and it's detrimental to our school success. So one of the things that you really got to always do is anticipate vacancies and always have a backup plan when you do have vacancies. And one of the first things that you've got to do is develop rapport with your certified substitutes. And I know also substitutes are hard to find, but the ones that you have, you've got to make them a part of your school community. This is one thing that I always stress with principals. Make substitutes a part of your school. Invite them to PD, invite them to celebrations, invite them to luncheons, after school events, give them apparel, make them feel welcome, because right now they're saving our schools. You covering classes and substitutes covering vacancies. They're people that are really keeping our schools afloat. Work with high schools to develop and implement teacher cadet programs to try and get teachers to come back. In Lincoln County, that's where I did a lot of my district work. Each of our high schools has really revamped and revised their high school teacher cadet programs. And actually this year is the first year that we've started seeing some of those people actually coming back. Network with local colleges and universities. One of the things that we did, in Kannapolis, we had a partnership with UNC Charlotte. A lot of our future teachers didn't have classes on Fridays, so we made sure that those people could sub for us. We got them into our buildings, and then we eventually hired them. Know your parents, especially at the elementary level. Many of them are stay-at-home. A lot of them are former teachers. And you can convince a lot of them to come into the building, especially if you talk about the substitute shortage. But again, invite those parents in, make them a part of your community. And those are really good. At the elementary level, we get a lot of maternity leaves, every level does, but again, that's where those former teachers who are stay-at-home moms can really come in and support those maternity leaves. And that is something that you always must anticipate. One of the most frustrating things that I would do when I would work with principals is they would say, oh, we have this maternity leave coming up and we don't have anyone to fill it. And the first question that I would ask, well, when did you start trying to fill it? And they're like, oh, 2 weeks ago. Well, how long have you known this person has been pregnant? How long did you know that there was a maternity leave? Obviously about 9 months. You can't just wait until the last minute, especially in the reality of today, because there's just not a lot of people out there who want to do them. Dr. Lamb, I told them that I was not good with the chat. So we got anything so far?
I'm good. I've got 2 or 3. I've got you covered.
Okay, perfect. All right, so let's transition over to hiring and some of the hiring best practices at the school level. And again, just the disclaimer here: some of these have to be modified in today's world, but we got to try and stick to these as best as we can. The first one, it doesn't matter what type of reality we're in, you've got to know your district's hiring policies and procedures. Simply put, you've got to become really good friends with HR, because who you have in your building matters, and we got to make sure that we have the right people in your building and that you went through the appropriate procedures and protocols. And even though they vary from district to district, they really vary depending on size. What happens doesn't necessarily change, but who does it in the district changes because of the size. So for example, some of the smaller districts, principals bear the brunt of the hiring process. Some of the larger districts, like CMS, Dr. Lamb has a ton of experience there. There's a person for that, right? Anything you want to say about that, Dr. Lamb?
Yes, when I due process is mandated by the EEOC, the Employment Security Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, EEOC, Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, is federal. And it says this is the substantive due process of what you have to do to give everybody an equal opportunity. And there's a laundry list of things that you have to do. Now, they don't say who has to do it. And every district is different. To Dr. Sain's point, when I was in Burke and Rutherford, far west, low wealth, poor, I had to do it all, everything, even advertise. I worked 17 years out in the woods. I got to go to the big time, just like the Clampetts. I got to move to Beverly Hills, got to go to Charlotte, didn't have to do anything. They did everything. Somewhere in between, that is the procedural due process. Substance is what do we have to do? Procedure is who does it. We have to make sure that they align. That's where we get in trouble. Even when things are tight and you're short and they've dumped all this stuff on you, if something goes wrong, they come back to you as the building person. The people in HR don't know, they don't answer the phone if something goes bad. I'll just tell you. So that's why for our activity for this week, it is what is the process in your district? Who has to do what? Who has to advertise? Who has to vet? Who has to do the blood test? Who has to do the drug test? Who has to do the background check? Who has to call the references? All of that stuff has to be done in every district. It's just who has to do it.
Yeah.
The wealthy places, I just called my analyst and said, send me 3 candidates. And I just picked the one I wanted. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I did everything in the others. You got to find what the ethic is, what the responsibilities are in your district. That's your weekly assignment this week. Thank you for setting me up there, Dr. Sain.
Yeah, no problem. And so kind of the next 2 bullets, I kind of just assume or these are just kind of some general ideas of a medium-sized district, about some things that you would do at the school level. So the first thing is assemble a team to review resumes. If you can't call up your district office and say, send me 3 candidates. One of the things that I want to talk about is actually who needs to be in the interview seat. I've got down there at number 4, like you want an administrator, obviously, a coach, a grade level subject chair, a sit chair, or a parent. But in my experience, and I think Dr. Lamb will agree with me, less is more. In terms of who you have at the table for interviewing. And I know a lot of people want to be a part of the interview process, but when you get a lot of opinions in a room, it becomes difficult to do your work. And that, as you guys shift your mindset from being a teacher to an administrator, that's one of the first things you're going to learn is that while teacher opinion is so important, and their input is important, there is a time and place for it when you as an administrative team are making decisions that impact the school, and hiring teachers has a long-term impact on your school. Now, an easy way to value input of everybody is to take the grade level where there may be a vacancy and allow the grade level teachers to review resumes and make suggestions to the interview team. But I would refrain from having everybody in the grade level at the table, or everybody or a representative from every grade if you don't know what grade level it is. I would try to make it as simplistic as possible while still getting people in that room that will challenge you. And that's where it's key to have a good admin team. But at the end of the day, You, as the principal, have the final say. You are the one who makes the recommendation for hire. Um, so again, that's just kind of a disclaimer, and I think Dr. Lamb was shaking his head. I think he agrees with that. Big teams just they just never worked for me. First of all, big teams intimidate candidates, and then you really don't see who they are. Or you just get caught in the weeds of people's opinions, which sometimes gets in the way. I put there down there the 5: interview at least 3 candidates, more than 3 if possible. I mean, the more you have, the better. I know that is tough in today's climate, but 3 is that general kind of at least 3. There are special circumstances, but let's just say that you only have one person who applies and your district says you must have 3, I would get in contact with HR and explain the situation. It always has to be a conversation when you're adjusting or modifying some of the HR protocols in your district. There are going to be situations where you have to do things a little bit differently, but you always want a stamp of approval from people who are the experts in HR at your district level. Another thing that just could be helpful is use a rubric during interviews, especially if you have a lot of people. It limits the conversations of candidates, and then you can review the rubrics as an admin team, and then you select the people that you want. Because again, another thing you're going to find is that as you make this shift from a teacher mindset to an administrator mindset, your views are going to change of what is needed because you are thinking about the school globally, not the school in terms of a pod in the building. You're thinking about the overall success of the building. That shifts your thinking as to who you want on your school's team. So, again, in a perfect world, select 2 candidates, 3 if you're not confident in the hiring pool, and then begin calling references. One of the things that I've had some principals make the mistake of is they pick one person that they put all their eggs in that person's basket after an interview, tell everybody else they don't have the job, then they start calling references, and that person is just a really good smoke blower, so to speak. And then you have you're caught in a pickle. You can call those people back that you already said no to, but guess what? They know that you weren't their first choice, and that makes a difference in sometimes where people are going. And in today's environment where candidates have options, that's you've lost them. So again, select a candidate and let them know that you are recommending them for hire. Keywords: recommending. You are not hiring them, you are recommending them. And it's a lengthy process, but at the end of the day, it requires board approval for those people to become teachers in your building. And so usually that happens at a monthly board meeting, but in times of urgency, which a lot of boards are starting to do, they're calling these special meetings. If there's a lot of vacancies and it doesn't necessarily align with the board schedule, sometimes they'll do some special meetings. And then the last one there, if approved as a sub, sometimes the candidate can sub in the room until officially approved as a teacher to kind of bypass that process. But here is the thing that I want you to make sure that you tell that substitute is that they will not be paid as a teacher until they're approved as a teacher. So they would continue to be a substitute even after you recommended them for hire. I've had some specific cases where we use language loosely with HR sometimes, and we tell somebody, "Oh, you've got the job." Well, you really don't have the job until the board approves you. So when you get in a situation that with a substitute that you're hiring to take over a teacher, you've got to be explicit about what they'll be paid until they officially get approved. Dr. Lamb, anything you want to add there?
Yeah. Zach says he got sub pay until he graduated and board approved. That's exactly right. And also, the corollary to what Dr. Sane just said is there's 2 types of sub pay. There's regular sub pay, and then there's long-term sub pay. Now, what you might can do, and again, this is a might, to try to help your people out. You might can see in the interim time if you can get them shifted from regular sub to long-term sub pay. That'll get them a few more dollars until you can get them in a home. But what we worry about is somebody up snapping them up before we, if they're good, before we can get them. So you don't tell them that, but see if you can call your HR and say, can I shift this person on to long-term sub pay till we can, since we're going to recommend them for hire. And it may not be a whole lot of money, but it's the thought that counts, that you're trying. I've done that a number of, and I'll just have to say the folks in Charlotte were wonderful about doing that, shifting them, and the folks. I'm sure it wasn't a whole lot of money, but it made all the difference in the world to those people that you would do that for them. Thank you.
Totally. Yep. So just going on to the hiring process. So why do we emphasize the recommending to hire once you've got some candidates that you check their references and you've got it narrowed down to one person is just this right here. Read this general statute. It shall be the duty of the superintendent to recommend and the Board of Education to elect all principals, teachers, and other school personnel in the administrative unit. Key there is the Board of Education must approve. And here's what happens after you recommend for hire. Once candidates are submitted, after the interview process, there is a whole bunch of stuff that must go on. And you all have been hired and you know all that paperwork and that process that went on. But again, we can't officially hire until all of this stuff is we went through that checklist and the board approves. And so that's why it's so key that you continue to say recommend for hire until, again, you get that final approval. But you've got to do the criminal background check, drug test, completion of forms, submission of requested documents and paperwork, salary information, and then you finally get to the approval. And I'm sure there's 15 other mini bullets that go into that process. I kind of summarized it there. And that's, again, where it varies upon districts. Listen, when I was in a small district as a principal, we've gradually got a little bit better in Kannapolis, but I was the one lining up the drug tests. I was the one making sure that they had all of their forms completed. When you go to the medium size and larger districts, and if you're lucky, some of the smaller districts have people that handle this on the back end of that. So really all you have to do is submit a name. But again, here's the thing. Even in those bigger districts, even in the medium-sized districts where this stuff is handled for you, it is imperative that you have a good relationship with somebody in that HR department so that you can continue to follow up. Because in a world where we're hiring teachers, I mean, HR departments are busy all the time. Sometimes the ball gets dropped. And again, when we're living in a world where teachers have options or future teachers have options, they're not going to wait around. And if you don't, constantly check in with that person and tell them here's where we are in the process, and then constantly, communicate with HR to see where you are in the process, you have the potential of losing people. So just a little tidbit of advice there. All right, so that's the first two. So recruiting and hiring. Anything you want to add to hiring, Dr. Lamb, before we move on to development and support?
No, we're good.
Okay. All right. So you got somebody hired. Well, here's where the real work starts. And that is developing and supporting teachers. And I put this in there. This has become a critical component in a post-COVID school reality. And the reason is because, you can blame it on generation or generational changes. You can blame it on teacher ed programs. You can blame it on whatever you want to blame it on. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is teachers, again, have options. I sound like a broken record. But if a teacher doesn't like where they are, guess what? There's 50 other vacancies at other districts that might pay more where they could go to. So the ball is in their court with how we have to serve them. And I am by no means saying that you should bow down to every demand of your educators when you become principals. But what I'm saying is we got to keep it in mind that it is a little bit different of a reality, because this new generation is going to stay there 3 to 5 years. Don't expect anything more. I mean, if they do stay there more than 5 years, you got a good one. I think I told this story last semester, Dr. Lamb. When I became a principal in Kannapolis, there were 35 grade level teachers. 28 of them had 20 plus years experience. Well, they all retired. And now the person that took my spot at that particular school, has not had a consistent grade level team in 5 years. Okay, so that is just our current reality. Um, Teachers leave. They've got options. We're moving around. This new generation of teachers, they leave because they can. There's options and there's places to go. So I say all that to say, first of all, don't anticipate someone to stay longer than 5 years. When we talk about expecting vacancies, don't anticipate. And here's the key: if they do stay longer than 5 years, you can be pleasantly surprised. But again, I just think that's got to be our mindset. I don't think it's a negative mindset. I think it's a proactive mindset. Um, but here's what you can do to help teachers stay as long as possible. Help them navigate available services provided by the district and community, like the legal services, financial services, childcare. Listen, if you've got childcare issues with teachers, try everything you can to accommodate those childcare requests. Now, I'm not saying let them be 30 minutes late every morning for childcare, but try your best. Make an effort to work with those situations. Those are realities. And again, that goes a long way when it makes them feel valued, that you care, you want them there, that you're willing to go the extra mile to meet them in the middle. Appreciate your staff more than Teacher Appreciation Week. It was great. We just had Teacher Appreciation Week. I saw all the posts. Teachers most were happy during that week. They were posting positive things on Facebook about Teacher Appreciation Week. It makes all the hard work worth it. What if we did that once a month? What if we did that every day? Imagine a world where teachers are posting positive things about schools every day. And I know that gets into money and budgeting issues, but that should be a part of how you spend some of that money that you have in your building, especially from your PTO and any other support organizations. Take care of your teachers. Acknowledge their contributions to students and to the school. On social media, that goes a long way. And again, I know that sounds very simple, but again, here's the thing. You got to remember, HR is one component of 500 things you're doing in a day. Okay, so you forget to do these basic things like highlighting your teachers, highlighting the good work that they're doing, getting a positive name out there in the community for them. Food, I put a little exclamation mark there. Food makes people happy. Any chance you get to feed people, do it. And then a big one here is as you all know, you're all in education. It seems like parents have lost their minds. And it's always the teacher's fault. And one of the things that you've got to make sure you do is you support your teachers when angry and disrespectful parents are attacking them. And unfortunately, you all may have experienced that. I know that happened before COVID, but you probably experienced it after COVID. But being willing to sit and to support a teacher during those conversations is critical in getting them to stay. Because as soon as you don't do that, conversations, difficult parents and difficult conversations, it's a hard thing to do. But as soon as you kind of abandon, and that's what it feels like, as soon as you kind of abandon a teacher with a situation like that, the first thing they're going to do is go home and look at vacancies in other districts. It's just the way it's going to be. And here's where I, as a principal, had to bite my tongue. There were times when my teachers were not necessarily in the right column. They had done some things that I maybe would have done differently, but I still supported them from a parent harassing them or treating them unfairly. And then after that conversation, we had a hard conversation about what you're going to do differently in the future. So I'm not saying ignore all, I'm not saying that if a teacher does something, flagrantly wrong, you still support them. But what I'm saying is, if they did raise their voice with a kid, or if they said, finish your tests before you go to the bathroom, if they do something minor and a parent is overreacting, be there to support them and then possibly follow up with a conversation afterwards. That's how you get them to stay. As soon as you abandon them, they're gone. So once hired, again, we're going to continue with this theme: provide curriculum support, focus on areas of teacher strength. If you have a teacher who's good at teaching math, then focus on that. I made the mistake of trying to make every teacher a universal teacher. I was a principal for the most of my time in an elementary school. And and I really lost sight of really capitalizing on some of our curriculum specific teachers. And in today's world where you've got schools that are curriculum specific, especially at the elementary level, middle and high school obviously are curriculum specific, but you could lose people. So again, focus on those areas of teacher strength. Even if it's on student behavior, focus on those areas of student behavior, or teachers who can deal with behaviors and provide professional development for that. Again, I know we live in a world where subs are limited, but budget for subs in your school improvement plan. I'm sure there's something about professional learning. Well, professional learning's only as good as the time you have to give it, and if you don't budget for subs, teachers are not really wanting to cover so other people can provide professional development. Now that has to happen in a world where we don't have subs, but again, try to budget that. Protect planning time as much as possible. I know people are laughing because again, the shortage of subs and vacancies, but again, anytime you can, do it. But here's what I want to point out to that is when you become an administrator, and some of you may already be administrators, so if you are, I don't want you to do this. You cannot be the person that covers vacancies. Administrators cannot be the ones covering vacancies. You can do it here or there, maybe 15 minutes or 10 minutes. But I would go into schools and I would say, well, where is the principal? I need to see them. Oh, they're covering so-and-so's class for the day. That is a recipe for disaster. One, it's not sustainable for you. Two, it's not sustainable for school safety. Three, it's not sustainable it's just not sustainable. It's not a good decision. What if somebody intruded into your building? I mean, we're going to talk about school safety here, and you're on a playground, or it's just not sustainable. Now, as an educator, we celebrate principals who do that because I'm not saying that we shouldn't. Here or there, little snips of time is great, but again, it's just not best practice for administrators to be that bunkered or that removed from building management. So another tip here: provide PD during staff meetings. That's kind of a key. Most things presented in a staff meeting can be sent in an email, and just a tip that I use as a principal, I sent our staff meeting notes in a Google Doc, and there's a little tab on Google Doc where you can actually see who opened it. And if I went through and saw that there were certain teachers who didn't even open it, then I'd have a conversation. I need you to read this. But again, that allows you to open up some time for some professional learning during staff meetings. The last thing you want to do at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when you've had kids all day is sit there and listen to something that can be sent in an email. And again, do all these things even though newer teachers will only stay in the field 3 to 5 years. You have to. If you don't do these things, it's just going to be a constant in and out in your building. And at the end of the day, when that happens, who suffers? Our kids. Your school improvement suffers, your school performance suffers, but most importantly, the teaching of our kids suffers. And again, I can't reiterate this enough. Ensure the same development and support is given to your subs, because again, they are strong subs. Even put there, strong subs are often better than our weakest teachers. And again, the subs that we have, we've got to make sure that we treat them like they're one of our own. Again, find ways for your strongest teachers to lead, and try to put that in the budget through stipends, through sub coverage. Again, I'm sure last week when Dr. Lamb gave you the intro to this course, we're going to cover the things that makes being an administrator sometimes unpleasant. And one of those things is you are not going to have time to do everything you want to do instructionally because there's so many other aspects of being a principal. And so that's why it's so important to find your strong teachers and let them help you on the instructional piece. Instructional leadership with a principal is so key, but a good instructional leader knows their limits of when and where they can support, and they have people that can go in and support teachers the way they would. So just keep that in mind. Be the leader. be the leader you wanted when you taught, supportive, understanding, solution oriented. Um, Listen, this is the biggest thing. I mean, when we want to keep teachers, when a teacher has your time, don't text, don't email, don't seem distracted, unless your building is burning down or there's an intruder, obviously. But again, make sure that they have your time, because again, in today's world, once they realize you don't, they're looking other places. And again, there are so many other jobs where they can make a lot more money. So why work for little pay for somebody who doesn't even listen to them or pay attention to them when you've got 5 minutes of their time? So again, just keep that in mind. All right. Um, Last thing for development and support: view your development and support through the lens of the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. Um, so again, make sure you're responsive to that. You'll get it every year. Um, and you've got time, facilities and resources, community support, student conduct, teacher leadership, professional development, instructional practices. Those are, I mean, they all align with how we should develop and support teachers. Um, we don't just do those surveys just to have, numbers. If you've got lower numbers in those categories, um, change what you're doing. It's something. I mean, it's not, they're not lies, they're not fabrications. If anything, sometimes they're inflated because people just click strongly agree just to get through the survey. So I always told my principals, if you've got good results, I want you to really drill down and see if you do, because sometimes people just rush through them. But again, that's just a great way to kind of structure your development and your support. Um, and again, respond to those surveys, and continually check in on those surveys, and then also be open with your staff about, hey, listen, I know you guys are struggling with us with resources, so here's what we're doing to try and support that. Be open with what your plans are in development and support so that teachers know. All right, that was number three. Anything you want to add there, Dr. Lamb, before we get into the world of evaluation?
Um, remembering back to last semester where you did the professional growth plan and it linked back to Todd Whitaker. What's the first step of empowering teachers in your building, letting them have impact or teach in professional development? That's key, folks. If you can get your best ones teaching your not best ones, that's where instructional leadership comes from. You can't do instructional leadership like if you were a coach or a facilitator. That is not the role of instructional leadership for a principal. It's identifying your best teachers and having them work with your not best teachers, like we had you to do, like Todd Whitaker said, that's the first step to improving your school. Just remember that.
Yep. All right, let's transition to Nisus again. Unmute yourself and tell me if you love the North Carolina educator evaluation system. Um, no one's unmuted themselves. It's pretty telling. Um,
I want to say no, and I'm sorry because I'm an actual school counselor, and we have to get one every single year. So we don't get the 3, and then we wait, and then we wait the 5. No, we get one every single year. So I'm gonna say no.
Okay, so I know that there are a lot of hardships with Nisus. I know that it seems redundant, um, but it's required. And if you've got to do it as a principal, you've got to make it a tool for school improvement. So it's right there. Nisus is only as good as the energy as your principal or you as a future principal put behind it. It can be a burden or it can be a tool for school improvement. And so just keep that in mind, because as a teacher, I had a principal. I taught at 2 schools. I had a principal who brushed it off, didn't care. And then I also had one who did. And guess which principal I was motivated to be better with? The one who brushed it off or the one who actually had some expectations? We expect our teachers to have high expectations for our students. I think the same should be said for our administrators should have high expectations for our staff, and this is a great way to put some energy behind those expectations and really create a plan. Now, it takes time to do this, but as soon as your teachers start seeing your niece's schedule as a checklist for you, no one's going to get any value out of it. It truly becomes something that is something we have to do every year, or every 3 months, or it just becomes a burden. So we're going to quickly go over this and what you've got to be responsible for as an administrator. You got to go through the evaluation process, which with every certified teacher in your building, which includes training, the self-assessment, and a professional development plan that can either be individual, monitored, or directed. Then your observations include the pre-conference, a comprehensive evaluation if you've been there for less than 3 years, 3 years or less, and abbreviated for more than 3 years, or a standard if you're in that license renewal piece, and then a post-conference, and then a summary evaluation. You do that with every teacher. But it's key how as an administrator, you're going to learn tricks of how you can kind of do some of these things together, doing maybe a training at a staff meeting or in a PLC. The self-assessment, going into grade level plannings and not having everybody talk about their self-assessments, but talking about the purpose of the self-assessment, giving teachers time to do it during that session where you can be there to answer questions. And a lot of them are technical questions on actually how to maneuver and what to sign off and all of those things. But then the observations, they should be taken seriously. And one of the things that I want you to do as you transition into this administrator role is actually read what NESIS says. And there are a lot of people out there who believe that in NESIS, just because you've been teaching for 10 years, you should be distinguished. And if you've ever read what the distinguished categories are, there are some superintendents who wouldn't be distinguished. I mean, there are people who have been doing this a long time, and the distinguished column is a really hard column to get. So, but as soon as you start handing out distinguished, like it's a free cookie on an airplane, you lose the meaning of what a distinguished teacher means in your building. And I don't mean any insult to anybody who's been rated distinguished. I'm sure that everybody on this call has been rated distinguished and you deserve it. But I'm just saying that you really need to read what those indicators say and rate educators accordingly once you get in the role. Because if you just go in there and you rate everyone distinguished, then people don't have the willingness to improve their teaching practices. And when that happens, school improvement doesn't happen. We always can improve. I was just doing a presentation today and sat there and made notes of everything that I could do to be better with it. And if you don't do that as an administrator, your school's either going to remain stagnant or remain where it is, or it could decline. So just keep that in mind. So there's links on this presentation that go straight to some NESIS information and resources for teachers and school leaders. But who will you evaluate in your buildings? You'll evaluate teachers. You'll evaluate instructional coaches, media coordinators, tech facilitators, school psychologists, social workers, counselors, SLPs. You'll evaluate all of them. Anyone who's certified, you'll evaluate them through the NESIS tool. And then you'll be evaluating them on standard 1, which is leadership, 2, respectful environments, 3, content knowledge, 4, facilitation of learning, and then 5, the reflection of practice. And then standard 6. So there are 5 standards that you evaluate, and then you have standard 6. And that's where the lovely world of EVOS comes into play. So without spending a whole session about whether you agree or disagree with EVOS, which let me throw a disclaimer to North Carolina. Even though EVOS is complicated, in my new role where I'm going to other states, ours is by far one of the better ones. Because there are some states that their EVOS systems or their TVOS systems, that's what Tennessee calls theirs, that all of their, I believe, I firmly, can say that North Carolina's EVOS system or growth system is far better than some of our close neighboring states, and then some of the other states that aren't close to us. So when you're upset with EVOS, just remember that it could be worse. But in Standard 6, teachers are rated by their student growth during the school year and by the statewide growth model for educator effectiveness. The State Board of Education approved the use of EVOS to measure the impact of a teacher on student learning, and EVOS determines growth by analyzing a student's predicted score compared to their actual assessment score. So again, there's some money tied to that now, which you can argue whether that's good or not. But again, that is the component that Standard 6 comes into. Anything you want to add specifically, Dr. Lamb, about EVOS?
Yeah, we covered this in depth last semester with
Okay.
them
Yeah.
on a coaching night. I did the calculus, the regression equation on the 10 variables that lead to the prediction equation. It's just a linear regression. And then Dr. Hamilton and Dr. Crawford worked with them specifically as sitting principals and showed them scores and gave them scenarios with teachers. So they should be up to speed and understand that that's a real important part of being an administrator, is looking at you not only teacher growth but your school-wide growth. Dr. Hamilton got deep into that, so they are very up to speed on that. And I put in the chat, just please remember, as we told you last semester, EVOS in North Carolina is the same as SLOs in South Carolina. That's what it's called there.
It's and here's a little learned lesson for me. So I am not a psychometrician, and I really don't like math, and I don't pretend to. So anytime I had an EVOS discussion, I always made sure that my assistant principal, who was really good with all of those equations and just the understanding of it, I understood it surface level. But again, when you're having these conversations with teachers, I think it's imperative that you have somebody who is somewhat of an expert in the room. And if my assistant principal couldn't be with me, I was not ashamed to call the district office and ask somebody to come in and say, hey, will you support me in these conversations? And I did that every year I was a principal, because my brain just doesn't work that way. But the point I want you to make is that anytime you get into a situation like that as a principal, don't just try to make it work. Create relationships, establish relationships with people in your district where you can call on them and say, hey, I need you to come and help me have this conversation. If you think you have to do it all on your own, you're going to mess up and you're probably going to get fired. Because we just can't. We're one person trying to run an entire building. You got to establish relationships and collaborate. So that was just my disclaimer. I understood the big picture of EVOS. I could see who was red and green, but when you're sitting there talking to a teacher who's red, and that teacher starts having specific questions, the last thing you want to do is make up things. You need somebody there that can talk to you, and then ultimately your school growth is so key and so important. So just remember that. So on that first list, you notice that non-classified employees non-certified employees, classified employees were not on that list. But that does not mean that they're exempt from evaluations. Each district this is where each district does differ a little bit in terms of how classified or non-certified evaluations are conducted. But in general, these evaluations are typically less involved than your certified evaluations. They usually happen once or twice a year, but they're key when implementing school improvement, because classified people are a key block in a school's foundation. We all know that. Schools can't function without teachers, assistants, bus drivers, front office staffs, receptionists, data managers, bookkeepers, and custodians. Those people are the lifeline of our buildings, and as a principal, they're going to become the lifeline of your existence. Teachers, assistants are there. Bus drivers will become angels to you. Your front office staff, your receptionist is probably going to become your best friend. The principal's chair is probably one of the loneliest chairs in the building. So and for some reason, the receptionist always becomes, or at least in my experience, mine became the best. And when we're talking about hiring front office people, and Dr. Lamb, we even talked about this in finance. You want your front office staff to be people that you can trust, and you want them to be people that are going to tell you the truth. You want people who are blunt. And here's how I judge if you've got an effective front office staff. If I walk away from a building, I would go into buildings, and if I walked away thinking, dang, that front office lady, she doesn't like me, or the male bookkeeper doesn't like me. That means you got a good one. That means you've got somebody who is going to hold you accountable as the principal. They're going to hold the teachers accountable for making sure that people are checked in and checked out right. Again, those are your front line. And not everything, in education we think everything has to be kind and nice, but you've also got to have people that are going to hold you accountable. So if you have a front office staff vacancy, a lot of people value the warmness aspect or the people aspect of it. Those are two positions that you want people. I mean, it would be great if they are warm and kind and fuzzy, but you've got to make sure that they know what they are doing, especially when it comes to the bookkeeper. But even the front office, the receptionist, some of you might have a combined position. Some of you may have more than that. And if you have a big front office staff, I mean, yeah, hiring one that's friendly and kind to greet people is great. But again, I just say that because it's the little things like that as a principal that usually when you hire receptionists, they stay. Or front office people really have a higher turnover or a lower turnover rate. And you want to make sure you have the right people there in those places holding you accountable as a principal. So what happens when a teacher leaves, transfers, or resigns, or is not rehired? So just quickly, here is the summary of the principal and teacher employment contracts. When a teacher plans to not return, they must give at least a 30 days notice. This includes if they decide to not return during the summer. So they still must give you notice. And what that protects you from is that, let's say that a teacher resigns, you start back to school on August 14th, the first workday is August 7th, a teacher resigns on August 1st. That gives you no time to go through that hiring process, to recommend for hire and then go through the HR process. So they still must work a 30 days notice. So they would still come back and you can hold them. Some districts have longer notice periods. I think, Dr. Lamb, didn't you tell me last semester?
45.
45. There you go.
You can declare an emergency or an exigency or difficult to fill. They're doing that. Dr. Griffin Jordan said they're doing that in Durham right now.
Okay.
They're holding them for 45. She said that last night. So yeah, 30 to 45. And if your district declares exigency that, it's an emergency, 45 days, you can hold them.
And typically, people will stay, but just before I left, we had a couple of cases where teachers came in and said, "I'm quitting," and we said, "We've got to hold you," and they said, "We don't care. I'm not coming back. You can withhold my pay. You can suspend my teaching license. I'm leaving education." So there are situations where sometimes that doesn't always work, but for the most part, I would say 95% of the time they'll stay. But that just, again, that shows you where we are as a state in terms of education, that we're having to actually extend that period to 45 days. So some districts require or strongly suggest an exit interview to obtain relevant information regarding a resignation or a retirement. If your district does not, this is something that I would do as a principal, because that's key information. You want to know why people are leaving your building, because if one person is leaving your building because they're upset, there's others in your building who are upset for the same reasons. You need to know that as an educator. It's not going to be easy to hear it or read it or whatever method you do to take it in, because a lot of times it's going to be specifically about how bad you are. But still, it's important because you're not a bad person. Just maybe the way that you've handled a situation, and you can learn from that to know that you can handle it better in the future. So again, it's hard to take feedback, but that feedback is so important as we're trying to keep teachers in the building as long as we can. So each district has their own specific procedures and protocols regarding transfers within the district. And right now we're getting into that situation, in that time where teachers may want to transfer to another school. Most districts have a cutoff date of July 1st, but that timeline varies. I was always adamant in our district that we should bump that up to the end of May, because transferring, summer planning is so critical as an administrator. I always lost that battle. But here's something that I want you to keep in mind, that as an administrator, you become part of a family with other administrators in your district. And what severs that family relationship the most is when principals start recruiting other teachers from other schools and not talking to the principals about it. So if you have a teacher that wants to come to your school, or you want a teacher from another school to come to your school, and it's going to happen. It's always going to happen. Always be open and honest with the principal of that school you're trying to get them away from. I was guilty of that my first year teaching. I said, "Hey, I want you, but make sure you tell your principal that you're putting in a transfer." That teacher did not. I got a phone call. This is not the way we do things, Josh. You're new. Don't come in here and mess up our system. We talk about these things. Again, these are people that you are going to rely on in the future. These are going to become your really good friends because they are the ones that know what you're going through when you're trying to manage 500 things. So I just always said, try not to piss them off. Pardon the language, but again, you want to keep other administrators on your side. Dismissals and non-renewals. Unfortunately, in the district that I was just at, I was over the dismissals and non-renewal process, and nothing about this is fun. And we make it a lot more complicated than it should be for teachers who need to be dismissed or non-renewed, because we simply are not willing to have hard conversations. And as an educator, get ready, because you'll have at least one hard conversation every day. And if you don't, you probably should reflect on how you're leading. Are you leading as a best friend? Or are you leading as a leader? And again, I hate hard conversations. I'm sure Dr. Lamb doesn't like hard conversations, but correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Lamb, they're imperative to make your school successful.
Got to have what Ron Thompson used to call it, those come to Jesus meetings.
Yeah.
On a regular basis.
Yep. Oops.
You got to do it.
So true. And here are some of your reasons for dismissal: insubordination, inadequate progress, neglect of duty, failure to comply with board policy, and it must be documented through evaluations and growth plans. And here is the part that would frustrate me the most, when we would have principals who all year long would tell me, Dr. Sain, we need this teacher. It's just not working. She's not doing this. He's not doing this. I caught him, coming in late 4 times in a row. Okay, make sure you're documenting it. Make sure that we've got this. Make sure we're having conversations with this teacher. Obviously we would be in contact with HR throughout this process. But then you get to May, I would check in on them. Where are we with we're ready to go. Okay. I would pull up NESIS, and they would have the teacher ranked accomplished or distinguished in every category. And guess what? You can't dismiss somebody who you're rating as accomplished and distinguished. You can't dismiss them for instructional performance or neglect of duty. Now, if it's something specific, it's a one-time thing that happened where maybe it's something regarding sexual harassment. I mean, there's always these caveats, but again, you can't just dismiss a bad teacher or someone who you've determined as a bad teacher and still rate them high on NESIS. And that goes back to what we talked about. You've got to be willing to have hard conversations and accurately document teacher performance in NESIS. That's where it's critical to know what each of those indicators actually say. Dr. Lamb? It's 7:04. I did pretty good on time.
You did great. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
If you'll stop and share, I want to thank you so much.
Yeah, and I just want to. I got to run out to board my plane, but I'm looking forward to this semester. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right, safe travels. Thank you for being with us tonight. One of the things Dr. Sain talked about is your front office staff, and I put it in the chat. Here's 3 things that you can do to be a hero for your front office staff and really change the culture of your building. Those three things are don't process discipline or have kids drug into the front office that are going to get processed with discipline. Move that around the back where your APs are or whoever. Make sure that kids who are mad, misbehaving, or whatever don't get drug in your front office. One, it's a bad look for parents and civilians that come by. And number two, it really wears out your front office staff. So don't do that. Number two, don't have deliveries in the front office where they just come dump stuff in there and then the people in the front office are responsible to have to deal with that. That's not their job. And number three, do not put your nurse's office in the front office. That's a bad look too. And if you'll do those things, I'm telling you right now, you'll be a hero for them and you'll be able to get good people and it will really change the culture of your building. So those are three things I want to share with you. I'm going to share my screen and I want us to look at our weekly schedule. We always catch up on that. And as I said earlier, I picked out some things from folks this week. I was very pleased with your OMAs. I don't have anything to go over that. I do want to say, make sure if you're still on task one, make sure that, here are the elements. Make sure that you've checked each of these off before you turn in your OMA task one. Make sure you've addressed each of those. And also for task two, OMA task two, under task and prompts, I've got this little handy dandy guide on how to put that together. Shouldn't take you about 15 minutes because you've already done HAPTEL's task 1, 2, and 3. So task 2 takes about 15 minutes. Now let's look at the weekly schedule and interpret it. I sent out an email. So for week 1, by that Sunday, you should have started task 1. On week 2, by this coming Sunday, I believe it's the 28th, you should have turned in task 1. So that's the way it works. And so for next week, sometime early, first week in June, you turn in the Sunday at the end of this week. Remember, we turn in at the end of the week, regardless of whether you have class on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday with me. You turn in on Sunday. So OMA task 2 is not due this Sunday, but next Sunday. OMA task 1 is due this Sunday. So, but if you go early, I grade all the time. Again, I've been very pleased with what you're turning in. There's no buts or caveats. You're doing a great job. Just keep on going. All right, let's talk about our weeklies. I want to follow up from last week. Here are some things that I picked up. Again, very good job on everybody, but here are some things that I did want to make sure that I called out. And some of these, I hate to say some of this stuff, but I need to. On Dion, great job, Dion. I hope you're with us tonight. She caught that they're propping doors open in her building. I hate to say this, but the last 2 school shootings, the shooter got in through a prop door. That's a biggie. You just can't do that, folks. That's a good catch, Dion. Thank you for that. Paul caught a good one. Kids loitering around in the hallway or unsupervised, boy, that's a loser in court every time. That'll kill you in court. That's negligence. That's the definition of negligence. You can't have loitering kids. That's a great catch, Paul. Yolanda, unlocked doors. You can't. There are 16, and we'll cover this in a week or two. There are 16 acts of crime and violence that you have to report to law enforcement, Equal Opportunity Commission. You have to report it to Office of Civil Rights. Has to be reported to the state. There's 16 of them. 9 of those count against you in that calculation for persistently dangerous for you losing your job. 5 of them are sexually oriented: sexual assault, rape, indecent liberties, sexual offense, and there's one more in there somewhere. But anyway, guess where those things happen? Kids go down the hallway checking doors and find an open room, and that's where your sexual stuff occurs, folks. 1000%. If you want to stop sexual stuff from happening on your campus, make sure that unoccupied rooms are locked. It's just that simple. People say, well, this could happen to anybody. No, if you take precautions, you won't get very many of those persistently dangerous things happening. But if you leave unlocked doors around your building, kids will find them. You can't do that. And then Kathleen, she's very thorough in hers. In her answer, you might want to read through that. She had a bunch of really good points in hers. So thank you, Kathleen. I thought yours was really, really good. So those are the things. Now, this week, interview an administrator concerning human resources. As we said earlier tonight, who does what in your county? Again, It's all the same. EEOC has a list of about 15 things you have to do, but it varies who has to do them. You need to find out who does who and what and where. Then also ask about your HR people about employee assistance. Now, I'm gonna sound like a really bad person when I say this, and I just don't care. Employee assistance can be a really good thing for you and your faculty because they offer a lot of services. It can also be like somebody putting a tire around your neck and lightning, unfortunately. And I'll tell you why. I inherited a drug addict, and they knew she was an addict when they hired her. They hired her for a kind of a social worker, counselor, working with at risk kids, and she relapsed. And because she went to employee assistance before before I found out she had relapsed, wasn't anything I could do with her. I couldn't even get a long term sub. I had to go for 9 months with just a day to day sub in her classroom. I know that sounds petty and trivial. The woman had a lot of problems, but my job was to make sure that those kids got an education. You need to find out what's going on with employee assistance in your district because sometimes it works against you and the goals for your school. I want to get people help that they need, but I have kids in that classroom that need help too. So you got to know what the rules are on employee assistance in your district. If they get to them before you get them drug tested, then you're in trouble. Tara, you've got a question?
I actually hit that a little sooner. I just wanted to ask you if, when you finish, could you hang on and let me speak with you since I missed last week?
Sure, sure.
I just want to get back where
We
I
can
need
do
to be.
that.
Yes,
All
sir.
right. So back to our screen share here. So that's it coming up. And then looking ahead for next week or the week after, um, we're going to be shifting obviously next week to intervention and special ed. So there's the one for next week. And then coming up after that is the case study. You should be remember the first person on as the team member is the Zoom master for the week. You should start reading your first case study and getting ready to put together your PowerPoint presentation. Remember 15 to 20 minutes. We'll go on that night. Our first case study is on Wednesday, June the 7th. I'll talk more about it in depth next week. All right. So facilities, I have a really nice and long PowerPoint on facilities. Let me close some of this stuff. Let me see. I've got another one on human resources as well. I've got it in our shell. It's a little more detailed, but it's pretty much what Dr. Sane covered tonight, and we'll put his in later. But I've got one on managing school facilities that went along that kind of concludes this week. And it's got a lot of things in there. You ought to look at it. It kind of summarizes what we covered last week and this week. Now, I'm not going to sit and read it to you because I don't want to waste your time, but it is under this week's lesson plan. You ought to spend some time with this because it kind of summarizes and ties together everything that we talked about last week and then the facilities um, assignment that you had. It kind of brings it all together. So you should spend some time with this. All right, let me stop my share. As I told you, we do 2 hours, but I told you I'd get you out as soon as I could every week because I'm building up some goodwill here because boy, I'm gonna tell you that first case study night lasts forever. Y'all gonna be mad as hens at me that night, mad as fire. But I'm trying to build up a little goodwill here. I can't say enough good things about you. Your work, I do love to read your work. It is very good. There is no but or caveats or any of that. I'm very pleased with your work, the quality of your work. Dr. Sane and I are both, we've been, he and I follow up every week on what's going on, and I take notes, and he contributes to that. Remember, I've got my little red book as I grade every week. I try to make sure that I highlight 3 or 4 people who are doing a great job. You're working hard, and I appreciate that. So I'm going to leave it at that. Make sure you look at that facilities because it ties back to the budget that we talked about last week as well. But I won't waste any more of your time reading that. You can do that on your own time. Stay on your schedule. Summer's really tough. And so I don't want to spend 2 hours tonight. You can use the other 45 minutes tonight working on something for your class so that you don't get behind. I appreciate you being with me as always. And as always, thank you for choosing Gardner Webb. I'll see you next week. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording. So Tara, if you got something.